Welcome to the beautiful and picturesque village of En Karem, here in the Judean hills, not far away from the old city of Jerusalem, about 7 kilometers. This place is identified by the main Christian tradition as the birthplace of John the Baptist. From the Byzantine period, about the 6th century, we have the appearance of a tradition saying that here in En Karem, which means the fountain of Karem, we'll address to this name in a moment, was the place where Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, was residing. And therefore, later tradition also identified this place as the place where Elizabeth and her husband, the priest Zechariah, lived and had John the Baptist himself. In front of us, right over there, you can see the beautiful Franciscan monastery, which is here from the 17th century, but basically the building that we see here is from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, where the church, which commemorates the place of birth of John himself, which means the home of Elizabeth and Zechariah, is located, and we're going to visit this site later. Right now, I'm standing in front of another beautiful Franciscan church, which is named the Church of the Visit. Follow me and look at this magnificent Franciscan church, which is the Church of the Visit. Also here from the late 19th century, built finally in the 50s of the 20th century by the famous architect Antonio Barluzzi. And look at the facade, which commemorates the coming of Mary, having Jesus in her womb, to visit her cousin Elizabeth, who lived in one of the towns of Judah. The name En Karem is not mentioned in the Gospel of Luke, which is the only gospel which talks about the birth and the early times of John the Baptist before he baptized Jesus in the Jordan River, as you're going to see later in this series. Look at the beautiful bell tower, the facade, and the lower part, which commemorates the house where both Elizabeth and her husband Zechariah, which are seen here in front of us in those two statues in between the Franciscan cross, the cross of Jerusalem, with the big cross and the 4 small crosses. The Franciscan monks are living here or having this place already from the 17th century, during the early Ottoman period, when they came here to En Karem to actually restore the Christian presence in this site, which was one of the most important sites during the Crusader period in the 12th century, in the time of the First Kingdom of Jerusalem, when the Crusaders, who were not so good in geography, by the way, identified En Karem not only as the place where John the Baptist was born, and therefore commemorated this place in an early church, but also the place where Mary actually visited her cousin Elizabeth. And while those two women were having their child in their womb, they met each other right over here. Here in the yard of the church, you're going to see a beautiful statue which presents the meeting of the two pregnant women. And we're going to read the text in a moment. I'm reading now from the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, the story which relates to the meeting of Mary and Elizabeth here in this area. Now, at this time, Mary arose and went in a hurry to the hill country, to a city of Judah. Pay attention that the Bible does not mention the exact location of that place where, as we're going to see, Elizabeth was residing together with her husband, the priest Zechariah. Therefore, in the beginning, in the early times of Christianity, there were several ideas where to locate the hometown of Elizabeth and Zechariah, in different places in the territory of Judea, in the hill country of Jerusalem, and even Jerusalem itself and even Hebron were mentioned in that relation. As I said before, the real identification of the place with En Karem happened a bit later. In the 6th century. We have Theodosius mentioning En Karem as the place where Mary resided, but only from the 9th century onwards, in a Georgian source, there is a really identification of En Karem as the place where Zechariah and Elizabeth were living, and when where the visit took place actually. Mary went to a city of Judah and entered to the house of Zacharias and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb. The baby, meaning John the Baptist, who was about 6 months older than Jesus himself. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and she cried out with a loud voice and said, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And how has it happened to me that the mother of my Lord would come to me? For behold, when the sound of your greetings reached my ears, the baby leaped in my womb for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what had been spoken to her by the Lord." It is interesting to see this moment when actually the meeting point of the two babies, which are very, very young in the womb of their mothers, but this is a very symbolic moment, because it actually talks about the idea that John the Baptist is the proclaimer of Jesus. In Greek, the prodomos. And it means that we have this idea that we're going to see in several places in the Gospels, the idea that actually John the Baptist is like Elijah in the Old Testament, and in Judaism, Elijah is the proclaimer of the Messiah. And also here in this moment of the meeting, okay, the excitement of John the Baptist in the presence of very, very young Jesus, we see this idea that later is also mentioned in the book of Matthew, chapter 17, after the moment, the story of the transfiguration, when Jesus and the disciples are going down, descending from the high mountain, they are talking about the idea of the coming of the Messiah and mentioning Elijah. Don't forget that the Old Testament ends with the book of Malachi. Malachi chapter 3, where the prophet of God is talking about the coming, the future coming, that God is going to send Elias, the man of God, the famous man of God, again, that is going to proclaim the coming of the Messiah, the future Messiah. And there is a very, very important identification between the character of Elias in the Old Testament and John the Baptist. Therefore, in the book of Matthew, chapter 17, we see that the disciples, when they talk about the idea that Elias is about to come and proclaim the Messiah, Jesus is answering and telling them that he already came, but nobody notified him, and they understand that he is talking about John the Baptist as actually the same Elias mentioned in the book of Malachi. So here we are in front of the church of the visit. The next thing that we read in Luke chapter 1 is the famous text of the Magnificat, the answer of Mary to Elizabeth, and when she exalted the Lord in a very, very famous text, which is written here in dozen languages, as can be seen, including Hebrew, including Greek, and including Aramaic. Maybe that was the original language when those words were saying. The Magnificat is a very, very famous text, which appears also in the evening prayer in the Catholic world, and is actually commemorated here in a very impressive way, where when the pilgrims coming to En Karem, to visit En Karem, they actually can read it in their own languages. The church itself, which has two levels, the lower one is actually the crypt of the original church, which was built here in the 12th century during the Crusader period. And it actually is a small chapel which commemorates the summer home of Zechariah and Elizabeth. We know that here in the villages, in the Holy Land, in the land of Israel, especially in the early periods, but until the modern times, until the 19th and early 20th century, the peasants, especially during the summertime, when they had to harvest the fields and pick all the fruits, they would come and reside in their summer houses, which were close to the fields, to the vineyards, to the olive groves. And that is what the Christian tradition says about this location, because we're going to see also the birthplace of John the Baptist, but this is the place where Mary and Elizabeth met. And to explain this, we have this idea that this was the summer house. Follow me now, and let's enter into the church and the churchyard to see some elements that are related to the meeting between Elizabeth and Mary here in one of the towns of the hills of Judah. Follow me. We can see here in front of us a modern statue, very nice, which shows the two women burying their child in their womb. You can tell that to the right, this is Elizabeth, because her belly is a bit bigger than the one of Mary. Remember that there is a difference according to the Christian tradition of about half a year between John the Baptist, who was half a year older than Jesus himself, and the two women meet here. And as we read in Luke, when John, who was in the belly of Elizabeth, felt the presence of Jesus so close to him, he started like to dance in the womb of his mother. So actually the excitement of the baby John in his mother womb, in the presence of the Messiah, Jesus, in the womb of Mary, is actually a very symbolic moment, which has to do with the basic idea of the identification of John the Baptist, Yohanan, with the figure of Elias in the Old Testament. As can be read in the book of Malachi, chapter 3, which ends the Old Testament in the Christian Bible, proclaiming in the future the coming of Elias again. And therefore, there is an identification between John the Baptist, and the figure of Elias. Let's go inside now to the small chapel under the main church, which is dedicated to the figure of Mary. Again, we are in a Franciscan church. Let's go here inside. So we are here now in the modern chapel, which used to be the crypt of the 12th century church that was built here by the Crusaders. We can still hear the cistern of water, which is located here, and you can see that it is inside the bedrock. The modern church is above us, the church dedicated to Mary. And look how beautiful this location is fashioned. Here on the floor, we can see the mosaic floor, which is fashioned like a carpet. So it gives us a sense that we are in an agricultural hut. The roof is designed like a roof of this hut, okay? Like a tabernacle. And you can see the grapes and the vines above our head. So it goes with the idea that when Mary came to one of the towns in Judea, she actually visited her cousin Elizabeth in her summer home, in her summer place, because it was during probably the agricultural activity. So we have the sense that we are now in the summer house of Zechariah and Elizabeth, and in the three walls of this small chapel, there are murals which depict moments in the story of the young John the Baptist. So right here to my right, we can see the image of Zechariah. He was a priest from the division of Abia, one of the 24 divisions of priests that were serving in the Temple of Jerusalem. And this is the moment when it was his turn to actually to do the burning of the incense inside the temple. This was the crucial moment when in front of him appeared the archangel Gabriel, who gave him the divine prophecy that he and his wife Elizabeth, both of them were pretty old at that moment, they're going to have their baby. And we're going to talk about this moment later. Right here at the back, this is the moment of the visit, the most important scene related to this church, the Church of the Visit, where we can see how the two cousins, Mary and Elizabeth, met, as we saw in the statue in the yard of the church. And here, to my left, another very important scene, which appears in an extra-biblical source. It does not appear in the Gospels, which relates the moment when Herod heard that a baby was born somewhere in Judea. He ordered to kill all the young born babies, the slaughter of the innocent. An extra-biblical source from the 2nd century CE, named the Proto-Evangelion of James, describes a very interesting moment that during that time when Herod ordered the massacre of the babies, also Elizabeth, who had her young baby, John, had to flee and run away from Herod's soldiers and was hiding behind a rock. And this is the scene that can be seen right over here. Next to me here, there is a rock which, according to the local tradition, is identified as the rock where the angel of God was hiding Elizabeth and baby John, and therefore it is located here. You can see that pieces of that rock were chipped off during the time, and that's the reason why it is now covered behind this glass. So it is interesting to see that already from very early times we have extra biblical sources that are adding information to what was going on here in the town in the hills of Judah. Only from the 9th century, this story of Elizabeth running away from the soldiers of Herod was identified here in En Karem. So we have already in the 6th century a tradition saying that Elizabeth was residing in En Karem, but then from the 9th century in a Georgian source we have the identification of that story of Elizabeth hiding from Herod's soldiers located here in En Karem, and therefore it is also commemorated here in the chapel of the Church of the Visit. We are here in the most important location inside the church of John Baharim, Yochanan Baharim, John in the mountains, the main church in the village of En Karem. And around me you can see the bedrock. We are actually inside a cave, a hewn cave, which was the crypt of the original church that was built here, commemorating the birthplace of John the Baptist, meaning that this was the home of Zechariah the priest and Elizabeth, his wife. Down here, there is the location, and I'm reading the Latin inscription, Hic precursor Domini natus est. Here, the proclaimer of the Lord, of God, was born. Exactly here. And this is the most important location that the pilgrims, when they come here to visit the church, which is now going under renovation, is located. By the way, the altar, all this complex here, was donated by Queen Isabella of Spain when the Spanish crown gave donation to the Franciscan order in order to rebuild this church. The beginning of the modern church is in the 17th century. In the 20s of the 17th century, the Franciscan monks came back here to the ruins of the Crusader church that was ruined by the Muslims after the Crusader period, after the 12th century. And they come here back. First, they settle here, and a few years later, they get from the Ottoman authorization the rights to build here a modest church, which was later rebuilt in the church that we see today. It's interesting to see that the modern church is based on the plan of the Crusader church of the 12th century. For example, the floor, which is a kind of mosaic floor, but it is in another technique of larger stone, known in the Roman world as opus sectile. Also here, and also in the main hall of the main building of the church, the floor, some of the stones here are from the Middle Ages, from the 12th century. What we can see here is several scenes that are related to the story of John the Baptist. Right here in front of me, we can see how John is baptizing the people, preparing them to the kingdom of heaven, as can be read in not only in Luke, but in the other Gospels as well. We can see him here with his typical pole, baptizing on the Jordan. And right here behind me, we can see John baptizing Jesus himself. Below the altar, there are three more scenes. In the middle, we can see again the visit of Mary when she came here to meet Elizabeth. On the left, we can see the birth of John the Baptist. Again, according to the local tradition, this location is identified as part of the home of Zechariah and Elizabeth. Maybe the cave was a kind of a basement, and therefore this is where John was born. And on the right side, we have the marble table, which shows the end, the tragic end of John the Baptist when he was executed. He was beheaded in the request of Salome, the daughter of the wife of Herod Antipas, who ordered to kill John the Baptist. So we have the entire story located in this very, very special location in En Karim. Above the altar behind me, we can see a very important scene depicting the moment of when John was 8 days old. And this is the time when in the Jewish, of course, the Jewish world, we have the circumcision, the pact of Abraham. And this is also the moment, until today, by the way, when a Jewish boy is born, the parents are actually proclaiming his name in public. What we can see here is both Elizabeth holding baby John, and kneeling in front of her, we can see the image of Zechariah, a bearded man. Both of them were quite old. And Zechariah is writing the name of the baby. Everybody was expecting that the name of the baby would be like his father, Zechariah, because that was the custom. But it was surprising that both his mother, Elizabeth, and Zechariah, who is actually writing the name, as can be seen here on a board, they tell everybody that the baby's name, to the surprise of everybody, is going to be Yochanan. Okay, God has pardoned, or John in English. How come that Zechariah is writing the baby's name on a board and not proclaiming it from his mouth? So let's go now back to the text. Let's go back to chapter 1 in the Gospel of Luke, and I'm reading from verse 5. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zacharias of the division of Abia, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. So she also was from a priestly family, and her name was Elizabeth Elisheva in Hebrew. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years, meaning that they were both old. And this reminds us of two biblical stories from the Old Testament. The first one, of course, is the story of Abraham and Sarah. Remember, both of them were very old when the angel of God appeared in front Abraham and promised him that he's going to have a son, namely Isaac. This is the moment when Sarah was also laughing when she heard about this meeting and promise. And another very famous story about two parents that had no children is, of course, the story of the birth of Samson. So again, we have this literate model of a hero, a superhero in that case, that was born in very, very hard circumstances. So John, like Isaac and Samson before him, remembered also that Anna, the mother of Samuel, also had a baby, and she praised Lord after having Samuel. So these are all typical prototypes of the story of John. So I continue. Now it happened that while he was performing, Zechariah, his priestly service before God, as we saw in the chapel of the Church of the Visit, so Zechariah did his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office. He was chosen by a lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the altar of incense. Zacharias was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your petition has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. And he will drink no wine or liquor," exactly as in the story of Samson, "and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he who will go as forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn to the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Now this is important. In verse 18, Zacharias said to the angel, "How will I know this for certain? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." The angel answered and said to him, "I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you shall be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their proper time." And this is explaining, the text is explaining exactly what we can see here in the scene. Zechariah could not speak until the birth of his child. So when the moment came to proclaim the newborn baby's name after 8 days, he could not tell it. He had to write it down. But after writing the name John, Yohanan, and his mother proclaiming that this is going to be the baby's name, now he began to speak again. And this is exactly what we can see behind us. Let's now continue to the yard of the church and continue our story. Right behind me, you can see Mount Ora, which is standing above the village of En Karem, and the beautiful Russian church, which is called, or also the Gorny Church, or the Gorny Monastery, built here when the land was purchased already in the late 19th century. We're standing here at the entrance of the church of John Baharim, Yohanan Baharim, John in the mountains, and the yard of the church is also very, very impressive. We can see in the yard a row of signs written on ceramic tiles in different languages, all of them the same text, the text of the Benedictus,
praise be or blessed be the God of Israel. This is the text which Zechariah is saying when he after John was born. During the 40s, during World War II, the British had here a military base in the compound of the church and the monastery. In one of the instances, a truck came into the yard, and since the yard is built over a large cistern of water, it collapsed. And that was, of course, a very good excuse to start to do some excavations here. And during the excavations, very important finds were found regarding the history of the village of En Karem. For example, right here in front of us, there are remains of a small church, a small chapel from the 6th century with a mosaic floor having an inscription in Greek mentioning or praising the martyrs. Who are those martyrs? Are those the martyrs in Christianity in general? Or maybe are those the babies, the innocents that were slaughtered by the order of Herod? We don't know exactly. We know for sure that there is no a direct connection between this Byzantine church in the village and the main tradition in Christianity about the birthplace of John and the hometown of Zechariah and Elizabeth. But together with the remains of this church, the excavations also show that during the Roman period, there was here a temple, maybe dedicated to Venus Podica, because they found here remains of a statue of Venus. But maybe the most important evidence, archaeological evidence that was found here was a cistern of water, which the ceramics together with it showed that it was from the Second Temple period, meaning approximately the time of Jesus and John. About 15 years ago, one of my colleagues here in Jerusalem, a very famous guy, Tamara Yardeni, re-examined the remains of this cistern, and she found out that it's not just an ordinary cistern. It has also stairs that are hewn into the bedrock, and the stairs are going down into the cistern, which is something very, very known in the time of the Second Temple period. Of course, we're talking about a mikveh, or a ritual bath, as we know from Jerusalem, from Qumran, from Masada. And this is, of course, a very typical element in a Jewish house in that period. We're talking about the early Roman period, of course. And that is a very, very important evidence, because it shows to us that En Karem was inhabited during the Second Temple period. So, although we don't have direct evidence, the assumption that maybe this Christian tradition is based on evidence, archaeological evidence, can be found in the fact that we know that En Karem was inhabited during the Second Temple period. I want to take you now to the core of En Karem, the reason why we have here such a beautiful village, and it has to do also with the name, the explanation of the name of En Karem, both in Hebrew and in Arabic. And I'm talking about the fountain of the village, which is the core of the village and the reasons for its existence. Follow me.
Fresh, pure water from the mountains of Jerusalem. We are now in the core of the village of En Karem. The reason why we have here a village probably already almost 4,000 years. The reason is that we have natural water coming out of the bedrock. This is a typical fountain that can be found all around the hill country of the land of Israel. We are now in the house of the fountain. Above us, remains of the Muslim mosque that used to be the center of the Arab village of En Karem until July 1948 in the War of Independence. This is the reason why we have here a flourishing village, which is also mentioned in many, many periods of time. We saw already that there is evidence that En Karem was inhabited in the time of Jesus and John the Baptist, meaning in the Second Temple period, but probably there are remains of earlier periods. For example, from the Bronze Age, when we have the first village here, the first agricultural village. all around us in the hills surrounding En Karem, in all the region of the hills of Judea, we have the typical terraces, agricultural terraces, which are probably very, very old in time, and they are actually the reason why this region was inhabited. First of all, you need to have the water. These are all rainwater that penetrated the bedrock, and they are actually going inside the layers of the limestone, the typical rock here in this region, until they reach a rock which is impenetrable. These are all fresh and pure rainwater. When it rains, as in this day, the water enters into the bedrock. It penetrates the layers of limestone, which is like a huge sponge, until they reach a layer of rock, which is like clay, impenetrable. But there are places, of course, especially in the lower parts, where there is a breach in the rock, and therefore the water can come out as natural springs, like here in Ein Karem. Already in the ancient times, the peasants had a technique to increase the amount of water coming out of the bedrock by cutting into the bedrock those aqueducts that goes inside into the place where the fountain, the natural fountain is. In that way, more water can come out and be used mainly for irrigating the fields and the terraces that are all around us. And we know that this kind of system of irrigating the fields was here until the modern times when the Arab village was here. The name of this fountain is also the Fountain of Mary, because it is related to the story of the visit of Mary to her cousin Elizabeth, and therefore we're not so far away from the place where we started our visit here in En Karem, which is the Church of the Visit. Okay, so this is a typical what we call a layer fountain, and that is explaining why we have such a flourishing village in many, many periods of time. Already in the Byzantine period, we know that pilgrims used to come here, and there is the first identification of En Karem as the home of Elizabeth. Later on in the Middle Ages, we have the clear connection between the home of Zechariah and Elizabeth and the birth of John the Baptist, which is going to be a very, very important tradition here in the time of the Crusaders. And therefore, the churches that we visited dedicated to John the Baptist and the stories related to John the Baptist actually started in the Middle Ages in the time of the Crusaders. The name En Karem in Arabic, is actually related to this location. Every place name in Hebrew, in Israel, which has the element of Ain, also around the Middle East in Arabic, means a fountain. Okay, like Rosh Ain, the head of the fountain, or En Gedi. And En Karem, the element of En, is related to this fountain, which is the main fountain. It's not the only one. We have other smaller ones here around us. They are all fashioned, they made in the same way. They are layer fountains. But the other element in the name, Karem or Kerem, in Hebrew has two meanings. Kerem is a vineyard, a place where you grow the grapes, and later on you will produce the wine. But Kerem can also be a grove of olives, from which you produce another very important product of the Holy Land, which is of course the olive oil. And actually in the hills of Jerusalem and in the hills of Judea, on the terraces that we just mentioned, this is the typical product which grows. We're talking about olives and grapes. And also here in the surrounding of En Karem, on the terraces, still you can see the abundance of those beautiful trees with the important fruits that were the main product of the Holy Land already from the Canaanite period onwards to modern times. And with this beautiful location, this rainy day, we will finish our visit in En Karem and later on continue the story of John the Baptist and Jesus. Until next time.